December 19th, 1944. Somewhere on the road between Malmedy and Stavelot, Belgium. A German Panzer grenadier crouches in frozen mud beside the wreckage of a road he no longer recognizes. His unit destroyed 3 American tanks here 2 days ago. He watched them burn. He watched the crew bail out and run. He saw the fire and the thick black smoke and the turret hatch blown sideways. He filed that road as closed. Now headlights. Not one set. 4. He raises his field glasses. The silhouettes are wrong for German armor. Too boxy. Too wide in the hull. The turret profile is flat and angular. His stomach drops before his brain finishes the recognition. They are Shermans. Not different Shermans. The same battered markings on the hull. The same unit insignia. The same tactical numbers barely visible under new mud and temporary welding repairs. 3 of the 4 tanks his company destroyed 2 days ago are rolling back up the same road. Moving in formation, moving at speed, moving as if they had never stopped. He will not file a report that makes sense to his commanding officer. He does not have the vocabulary for what he is seeing. He does not yet understand that he is not watching American stubbornness. He is watching a system. That system is what this episode is about. Before we get to how it worked, it is worth remembering that the Sherman was not supposed to win by being better. In the autumn of 1944, every serious analysis of Allied armor acknowledged the uncomfortable truth. The M4 Sherman was outgunned by the Panther. Its 75mm main gun had to close inside 800 meters to threaten a Panther's frontal armor. The Panther's 75mm long-barrel gun could kill a Sherman at 1,500 meters, head-on, in a single shot. The Tiger the Rhine's 88mm gun was worse still. American tank crews knew the math. British tank crews knew the math. Senior German commanders were briefed on the math and felt good about the math. What nobody on the German side had properly measured was everything that happened after the tank got hit. That gap in measurement would cost the Wehrmacht dearly in the Ardennes. Let me give you the number first, because it anchors everything that follows. In the first 10 days of the Battle of the Bulge, U.S. Army Ordnance Maintenance units returned to combat service, a figure that American divisional records put at roughly 60 to 70% of tanks that had been knocked out of action, but not completely destroyed. Tanks classified as battle casualties. Disabled, burned track, penetrated hull, damaged suspension, were being evaluated, stripped, patched, and returned within 24 to 72 hours in many cases. German armored maintenance, by contrast, was recovering a fraction of that percentage in the same window. Not because German mechanics were less capable, because the German supply and logistics chain for armor repair in December 1944 was already broken in ways that were structural and irreversible. When a German Panther broke down, mechanically, not even from enemy fire, it required specialized tools that were often not at the front. It required parts that had to be ordered up a chain that was being bombed from above and pressured on the flanks. It required trained technicians who were increasingly rare because training pipelines had thinned. A Panther with a damaged final drive. And the Panther's final drives were notoriously fragile, could sit inoperable for days, waiting for a part that was sitting in a rail yard 200 kilometers east. The Sherman's maintenance crew needed a wrench, some spare track links, a replacement bogey wheel, and a shift. If you want to understand how one side in this battle appeared to have unlimited tanks, that contrast is where you start. Keep that number in your head. 60 to 70% recovery rate in the first 10 days. The whole logic of the Ardennes counterattack is built on what that number made possible. The Sherman's reputation entering the Bulge was not good, and that is the honest starting point. In Normandy, from June through August of 1944, American armored units had suffered brutally. The bocage, the dense hedgerow country of northern France, compressed engagement ranges, and stripped the Sherman of the one thing it had: mobility. In that terrain, Panthers and Tigers could set up ambushes at ranges where the Sherman's gun was irrelevant. American crews developed a grim shorthand for what a Panther could do to a Sherman column. They called it a lot of things that are not printable, and one phrase that was brewing up. A Sherman that brewed up, caught internal fire, usually from the propellant charges stored in exposed positions, often gave the crew no time. The loss rate in some Normandy engagements was 4 or 5 Shermans for every Panther destroyed. By the autumn of 1944, crews had started calling the Sherman by a name the Germans had given it: Ronson. As in the lighter. As in, lights first time, every time. The fix for the propellant fire risk: wet stowage, moving the ammunition to safer positions surrounded by water glycol jackets, was being rolled out, but was not universal by December. So the crews entering the Ardennes still had an imperfect tank. They knew it. Their commanders knew it. The Germans knew it. And that knowledge was part of what gave the Wehrmacht's planners confidence in Operation Watch on the Rhine. What the planners did not correctly model was Lieutenant Michael Carter. Not Carter specifically, but the system that Carter represented. Carter was 30 years old in December 1944. He commanded a Sherman platoon in a unit operating under Third Army's umbrella. He was one of the African-American officers in the segregated U.S. Army of that period who had navigated a system that did not make it easy for him to be where he was. He had come through training, through the institutional friction of a military that in 1944 still assigned black soldiers to separate units with limited combat roles. And he had ended up commanding armor in the European theater because the pressure of combat attrition and political momentum, and the specific advocacy of commanders like General George Patton, who wanted every capable man in a tank, had begun to crack some of those walls. He was not the story. He was the proof that the story was real. The story was what happened when his tank got hit and what happened in the 48 hours after. But to understand that, you first need to understand the machine behind him. Not the Sherman, the other machine. The one with no armor, no gun, and no glamour. The U.S. Army's Ordnance maintenance system in the European theater of operations was structured in layers. At the bottom, closest to the gun line, was organizational maintenance. Every armored unit carried its own mechanics, its own basic spare parts, its own welding equipment. These were the men who could do a track repair in the dark, in snow, under intermittent artillery fire, because they had done it in training so many times that the sequence of motions was automatic. Above that was direct support maintenance. These were the ordnance maintenance companies attached to armored divisions. They operated mobile workshops, trucks carrying lathes, welding rigs, engine hoists, component swap kits. They could replace a transmission. They could swap a final drive. They could pull a turret ring and resurface a bearing. They could weld armor plate over a penetration that hadn't killed the tank's mechanical systems. They worked in blackout conditions, in temperatures that dropped to -20 Celsius in the Ardennes that December, in forests where German infiltrators were a genuine risk, and they worked in shifts that did not stop. Above that was general support maintenance, further back, where tanks with serious structural damage, cracked hull, dead engine, blown turret, went for deeper repair or cannibalization. The key insight in the American system was what was called push supply. The Army did not wait for a unit to request parts. The Army pushed parts forward on a regular schedule based on predicted consumption rates. Spare bogie wheels, track connectors, vision blocks, gun cleaning kits, final drive assemblies. These moved forward continuously in trucks, regardless of whether a specific unit had asked for them yet. When a Sherman broke down or was hit, the parts to fix it were frequently already a few kilometers behind the gun line, sitting in a forward supply point, waiting. This is not how the German Wehrmacht logistics system worked in December 1944. The German system was a pull system. A unit identified a need, submitted a request, and waited for the supply chain to respond. In 1941 and 1942, when the German chain was intact, moving fast, and operating with rail and road networks in good condition, This worked reasonably well. By December 1944, the rail network in Western Germany was being systematically destroyed by Allied air power. The road network in Belgium and Luxembourg was icy, contested, and covered by fighter bombers that attacked anything that moved in daylight. German logistics convoys moved at night, in fragments, carrying a fraction of what was needed. A Panther that lost a track in the Ardennes on December 18, 1944, waited. And waited. And sometimes, it was still waiting when the American infantry arrived. The German Panther was, in isolation, a formidable machine. That is not in dispute. Its sloped frontal armor made it nearly immune to the Sherman's standard 75mm round at most practical combat ranges. Its gun was accurate and devastating. Its crew, by 1944, was typically well-trained and tactically competent. But the Panther had a maintenance burden that its designers had never fully solved, and that the Wehrmacht's logistical situation in late 1944 had made catastrophic. The Panther's engine, the Maybach HL-230, was powerful but temperamental. It ran hot and required careful management. The final drive units, the mechanical components that transferred engine power to the tracks, were chronically weak. German engineering records and post-war analysis document that the final drive was the Panther's single most common mechanical failure point, and replacing a final drive required lifting the tank's nose, removing the front hull plate in some configurations, and installing a precisely machined component that had to come from a factory. There was no field expedient for a blown Panther final drive. The Panther also required specialized track tensioning tools. It required a specific torque on specific bolts that, if done wrong, could accelerate mechanical failure. Its transmission was complex enough that a mistake during a field repair could disable the tank entirely. German after-action reports from the Ardennes, post-war analysis of Wehrmacht records, interrogations of captured officers, describe a consistent pattern. Units entered the operation with Panthers that had mechanical deficiencies they could not fix in the field. Tanks that broke down during the advance were frequently abandoned rather than repaired, not because the crews lacked courage or skill, but because the parts did not arrive, and the trained personnel were not there. By contrast, captured U.S. Army records and divisional histories document maintenance companies working around the clock in the Ardennes forest, their trucks backed up against trees for concealment, their mechanics in parkas, their welding torches cutting blue light through the snow, returning tank after tank to the gun line. The Germans saw the returned tanks. They did not always see the trucks behind the tree line. I don't think the people who built this part of the war get remembered nearly enough. No one made a film about the Ordnance Maintenance Company working the night shift in a Belgian forest in December. Nobody put their names on a memorial, but the arithmetic of the Ardennes does not add up without them. December 24, 1944. Christmas Eve. Carter's Sherman, call sign November 24, took a round through the right side of the hull from a Panzer IV at close range during a fighting withdrawal near the town of Manhay in the central Ardennes. The penetration damaged the suspension, fractured a bogie wheel assembly, and started a fire in the engine compartment that the crew extinguished before it reached the ammunition stowage. The driver was burned on his hands and right forearm. The loader was shaken, but mobile. Carter himself was unhurt. The tank could not move under its own power. In the German calculus, November 24 was a combat loss. Mark it on the map, count it, move on. Carter and his crew did not move on. They stayed with the tank and called back to their maintenance track. Within 6 hours, in the dark, in snow, in temperatures that night reaching -15 Celsius, an ordnance crew was on site. They assessed the damage. The hull penetration had not destroyed the engine block. The fire damage was repairable. The bogie wheel assembly needed replacement. The track needed relaying. They had the parts. By mid-morning on December 25th, November 24 was operational. Carter's platoon, reduced to 3 tanks the night before, was back to 4 tanks by Christmas afternoon. This was not unusual. This was the system working as designed. If you have family who talked about the mechanics, the supply crews, the maintenance men who worked behind the gun line in the Ardennes, you understand what that kind of support meant to the men in the tanks. Those conversations carry weight that the histories sometimes don't. The German commanders on the receiving end of this pattern began noting it in their operational reports with a frustration that reads as genuine incomprehension. SS Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper, commanding Kampfgruppe Peiper, one of the 6th Panzer Army's spearhead units, later described in post-war accounts the experience of fighting American armor in the Ardennes as unlike fighting British or earlier American formations. The description that appears in various post-war analyses of his testimony centers on a single observation. The Americans' damaged tanks came back. Not always the same day, but they came back. Peiper's Kampfgruppe entered the Ardennes with approximately 150 armored vehicles, including a substantial number of King Tigers and Panthers. By the time the offensive stalled and the unit began its withdrawal in late December, a significant portion of those vehicles had been abandoned due to fuel shortage and mechanical failure, not solely to enemy action. The Germans were running out of the capacity to maintain what they had brought. German intelligence assessments captured after the campaign noted repeatedly that American armored units seemed to maintain effective strength at a rate that the German side could not explain with the enemy casualty counts they were generating. The assessments used language that amounted to, "We are killing their tanks faster than they are losing them." The explanation, that American maintenance was reconditioning those tanks and pushing them back, did not appear clearly in the assessments, because the assessments were built on a model of logistics that assumed the other side's system resembled their own. It did not. The numbers from the Ardennes campaign, drawn from U.S. Army divisional records and post-war operational analysis, carry the story without embellishment. The U.S. Third Army's armored units, which included Patton's relief thrust toward Bastogne, maintained average tank availability rates, operational tanks as a percentage of total assigned, that held above 50% through the worst of the fighting, and climbed back above 60% once the supply lines were restored in early January 1945. German armored strength, by contrast, collapsed. The Wehrmacht entered the Ardennes counteroffensive with approximately 600 tanks and assault guns. By the time the battle concluded in late January, fewer than 150 were still operational and in German hands. The rest were destroyed, captured, or, critically, mechanically abandoned on the roads and in the forests because they could not be repaired and could not be evacuated. The American side lost a significant number of Shermans. The official records document heavy losses in the first week, particularly around the St. Vith corridor and in the engagements around Bastogne. But the recovery rate meant that a substantial proportion of those losses were temporary. The Germans' losses, given the state of their maintenance and supply system, were nearly all permanent. That asymmetry, temporary American losses versus permanent German losses, is the real arithmetic of the Ardennes. In a battle that lasted 6 weeks, the side that could fix its machines faster than the other side could break them was always going to outlast the side that could not. I'd be careful with the simpler version of this story, the one where the Sherman was just good enough, and American production volume overwhelmed German quality. That framing misses the active mechanism. It wasn't just that America made more Shermans. It was that the Ordnance system made each Sherman count more than once. The verdict is not complicated, but it is worth stating precisely. The M4 Sherman was not the best tank in the Ardennes. By the standard metrics, armor protection, gun penetration, crew survivability per engagement, the Panther was better in a direct duel. German crews who faced Shermans in open country at range knew this. American crews who faced Panthers knew this. But a tank is not just its steel and its gun. A tank is a machine embedded in a system. And the system the Sherman sat inside in December 1944 was a logistics and maintenance organism that the German Wehrmacht by that stage of the war, could not match, could not replicate, and could not counter. The American Army had built, through 1943 and 1944, a push supply chain that moved parts forward, whether or not units asked for them. It had trained ordnance mechanics, whose primary identity was recovery and return, not just replacement. It had structured its maintenance layers so that a tank could be assessed, repaired to varying standards, and sent back in a time frame that compressed what the Germans assumed was the operational life cycle of a battle casualty. The Germans saw tanks they had destroyed. They did not see the wrench. Not the wrench as a symbol. The actual wrench. The specific adjustable spanner carried by every ordnance maintenance crew in the European theater. Standard issue, worn smooth by winter work, present in every forward repair site from Normandy to the Rhine. The tool that tightened the bogey wheel bolts on a Sherman in the dark, while fighter bombers droned overhead and artillery shuffled in the middle distance. That wrench, and the trained man holding it, and the parts manifest that told him what was already waiting in the supply truck behind the tree line. That is what the German intelligence assessments failed to measure. That is what Michael Carter's tank came back on. That is what broke the German offensive in the forest. You probably have your own verdict by now on whether the Sherman deserved its reputation, or whether that reputation was always measuring the wrong thing. Worth thinking about before the next episode.